Hello, good day, and welcome to the Point 99 podcast. I'm your host, Mr. Steve, and we're rapidly approaching the end of the season as this is episode 8 of season 5. Kicking things off with the intro for a change. For anyone who might not already know, the Point 99 podcast is a running podcast for all runners of all abilities, but especially the everyday runners out there like you and I. The purpose of the 99 is to try and help you along whatever path your journey is taking. That might be through relatable guests that we feature weekly with their unique and awesome stories, shared experiences and lessons that we will all inevitably learn during our own journeys. At least by sharing them, you might avoid coming across the same issues that we've had. The 99's biggest goal is and will always be to demonstrate that we are more alike than we sometimes think, and that through shared conversation, we can improve as runners and hopefully as more rounded individuals in our everyday lives as well. This week, we are taking the standard running chat that we have with the majority of our guests in a slightly different direction as we welcome a runner who has what some of you may consider a more interesting take on the sport and the footwear, or lack thereof, that he uses while he's outdoors. There will, of course, be more about that genuinely nice guy very, very soon. But first, let's dip our toes into my week in running and, more importantly, that of the wider community. For myself, it was once again much the same as last week's episode. I did finally get out for a couple of runs, but they weren't anything super long as I might have liked. Instead, it was back-to-back 10Ks on Saturday and Sunday, just to simply get some movement in. The first of the runs was on Saturday, and it was a back-to-back 5K effort. That was only because when I set off for the first part of my run, I noticed that my splits were pretty consistent, pretty decent pace. And I thought, you know what, let's just pick up the pace a little bit, put some effort into it. So it was my second fastest 5K with a 20 minute and 6 second effort. Very close to reaching another sub 20 and very close to my PB, but sadly wasn't to be. I hadn't planned to get a PB. It was just one of these things that happened. I hadn't been out all week. And when I set off, it just kind of worked out really, really well for me. Although the first couple of kilometers were comfortable, by the time I started kicking, it maybe was a little bit too little too late. One of the biggest problems I've always had, like I've mentioned on the podcast before, is that I struggle to push myself and drive to the line. So I think, if anything, it's helped me come to the conclusion that I do need to join a club or at least a group that will give me the focus and ability to push these times lower, because I know I've got the capability, I've got the capacity, it's just actually doing it. On that thought, I am very lucky to have someone who was and may still be the club secretary for my closest running club working for me during the election proceedings next week. So maybe before this season is out, I may have bitten the bullet and got my backside along to give one of their taster sessions a go and just see what I can do and how I can develop my running a little bit more. In the wider running community, we have a couple of shout outs and some observations from my own feed. The biggest issue I am always going to have, though, is missing people out, because my own feed's only so good. The algorithm only shows me what it wants to show me. So I do miss a lot of people. I did put the question up for inclusion, but as per the last few times, it wasn't well received. I did have a couple, but I do want to shout you out. Don't feel like you can't add yourself. Nobody's going to judge you for shouting yourself out. If anything, it shows more willingness to embrace your achievements. So if you ever see the question again, if I do put it up, feel free to let me know, or you can always slide into my DMs like our first shout did this week. This one comes from Andrew Murdoch, who is shouting at Curly Steph X ahead of her Saltire 12 solo this weekend. These are the sort of things I love when people slide in, they show appreciation to someone else, and he's there to wish her all the best and good luck for the Saltire. I'll echo that, but I am pretty sure I would have seen that one coming up and I will revisit it next week on the shout outs, and I'm pretty sure Steph will also be shouting herself out too. But thank you for getting involved in that one, Andrew. It is really nice to hear from new faces. You are a new face to the show, even though you did say that you are loving what I'm doing. So thank you very much, sir. And thank you for shouting out, Steph. I'm pretty sure we have a few others within the wider community tackling the Saltire this weekend. Not forgetting Mike Houston, who I know is tackling the 24, previous guest to the show, the Pole Fit Ultra Runner, now running Beyond Limits. I'm pretty sure we'll have a clearer picture as the posts come up over the weekend and Medal Monday. But I have had some confusion as to who's doing what, because I know the West Highland Way is coming up in the next week or so, the next couple of weeks. And I know some of the ultra runners are doing that, and there are a few doing the Saltire, but I'm getting a little bit of kind of crosswires as to who's doing what. But next week, hopefully we will hit the nail on the head and shout out the right people doing the right things. We do have a fair few of the men's and women's 10k smashers that took place in Glasgow over the weekend, but let's first cover this shout from our competition winner, Ultra Linny, as she shouts herself out for attending Emily in the Outdoors' Sunset Reset on Wednesday night. I assume that she did actually get herself out to that, because I never saw on her stories or in her feed if that actually took place or whether she got her backside along to it. But I know Emily has a lot on the go, covering a whole rake of things, different avenues, and as always is a busy lady. Hop on over to Emily's profile to give her a follow and see what she's got going on, whether it's her yoga, whether it's running. She is doing some amazing things for the community. On to the men's and women's 10k. We've got James McQuillan shouting out Andrew Kennedy for his PB at the event. I always love a cheeky PB shout, especially when it comes from James, who is such a massive supporter of others in the community. Well done, Andrew, and well done to you, James, for supporting the podcast and supporting Andrew in his PBs. Stuart runs a lot. That he does is shouting out his 44 minute and 44 seconds from the event. It's not that far off his PB either, but given the class photo of him looking like he was going to launch a water bottle at the camera person, I'm not sure if Stuart was actually feeling it on the day or not, but that was pretty close, man. Well done. A big effort right there. I personally saw a rapid performance from my Loch Ness 24 year 1 and year 2 pal, Jamie's _ runs, as he blasted out a 43.32 at the event. Not half bad given that he's on the road to recovery from injury and illness. Jamie will certainly be smashing that PB very, very soon. Big Bob Burrell had himself a good time of it, fitting in the 10k in between his long run session, ticking off a whopping 22 miles with the 10k kind of sandwiched in the middle and still slapping at a really respectable 49.48. Well done, Bob. That's some effort given the distance you were bagging that day. Otherwise, we have the Glasgow runner Connor Allen, Jim Boyle, Kevin Craig, Thomas Stewart and Ryan, that old bald guy Miller, down in attendance as well, looking like they were having a ball in what actually looked like a really good set of conditions for a change, especially given how variable the weather has been in Scotland recently. From the ladies, I only caught cracking performances from Alison Jardine, Scottish Marathon Girl and sidekick to Ryan Miller on the Press Play and Run podcast, casually smashing out a 43.42 and bagging herself 15th female and 3rd in her age category. And Cat Runner Mum, Catriona Nesbitt, who from her post race review did say that she found the race pretty tough, carrying a few niggles. Still got it done though, Cat, which is more than can be said for many others. So a big well done, regardless of if it went to plan or not. Away from Glasgow, we had our wee Parisian powerhouse pal, Elodie Runs, Curls and Chocolate Buns, cracking out the Trail Outlaws half, which she said was beautiful but brutal, while the positive pacer, Natalie Hunter, Ellie Forrester, Ellie X 26.2, Nick McGowan Low and Positive Lassie Karen were all down at Loch Lomond 10k, in which also looked like spot on conditions. So well done to everyone I mentioned. And if I didn't mention you, next time, get yourself into the question box or the DMs. But also a huge congratulations to whatever you were smashing last weekend or over the course of this week. Right, on to this week's guest. And once again, I'm going to let Steve from the other night do the talking as we welcome a good friend of mine from the running community to the show. He's a man who has a love for the more freeing side of running, kicking off his shoes and feeling the grass between his toes. Can only be one man. It's Ben, the Barefoot Daddy, Ben Weeks. Next up in the hot seat, we have a man who is all about feet. And no, not in the way your filthy minds are thinking, or at least not that I know of anyway. I mean, he's all about the barefoot way of life, or more specifically, barefoot running. His dedication to barefoot running and anything barefoot adjacent is blindingly obvious to anyone who follows his Instagram, with daily takes on the physical and mental benefits he has experienced. His love for barefoot extends beyond social media, as he is not only the co-founder of the Barefoot Crew 5K, an international love fest for barefoot running, but also a barefoot record holder, barefoot marathon finisher, and all-round fond of barefoot knowledge. This is sure to be an informative one as we welcome a man I've had the privilege of meeting and teaming up with at last year's Loch Ness 24. He's incredibly well-spoken and a genuinely nice guy to be in the company of. So let's introduce him to the rest of the 99 as we welcome the Barefoot Daddy himself to the show, Ben Weeks. Welcome, Ben.
Wow, that's quite some intro. Thanks, Stephen.
Written in 5 minutes after I panicked and forgot that I hadn't written one.
Oh, wow. Well done.
Are you having a good day?
Yeah, not bad. It's been busy. I've had sort of 2 or 3 Zoom or video calls today that I'm in the flow of conversation, or I'm at the tail end of it, and this is going to be really crap.
You were away in London as well, were you, yesterday?
No, I mean, so I am a commercial property agent by trade. I go into London. I was in London last week. And then I was in Woking, and I dance around. I'm in Bishop Stortford next week. It's all really subjective to where the client wants me to be, and all that sort of stuff.
It's an odd one as a Strava follower of yours. We're going to get to actual structured questions, but I do find it strange if a lot of the time you're in London, I never see you running there.
I'm in and out, like as
right,
in
on the train in and out again.
In and out, but I don't overnight. So we live an hour's train ride. Right. So I train ride in, go and do the work, train ride out, but I use it as my rest day typically. So, and it usually ends maybe having a couple of beers with clients and colleagues after the fact as well. And frankly, who wants to run on that unless you're missing the train or you're late for the train? Yeah. So, yeah, I don't live far enough away to justify. I have overnighted a couple of times because of animals and my kid, and my wife has a day job as well. It sort of impressed upon me that an overnight thing, if it were on a regular occurrence, has an impact on family life. Yeah, knock-on effect. I've learned to sort of manage, and actually, the older I get, I actually quite like coming home. It's nice going into the big city. I like London for what it is. Once I'm on the 8:03 train and see the sort of the green countryside sort of catching up with me, your heart sort of you have a little bit more peace. The comfort of nature. Oh man. And it'll be beneficial as well. I don't think you could really do much barefoot running unless it was with the barefoot shoes on as well in London itself. Would be a terrible place to be. I have barefooted in London, so I have overnighted, and out of principle, I think I was staying in Paddington, which is essentially my local station. I guess the local closest station to us, and I'd overnighted and got up at the crack of dawn, and whilst it wasn't quite so busy, and Paddington, if you've been into London, isn't terribly far from Hyde Park, and so the pavements themselves were quite smooth,
Okay.
You're ever, like, as I'm sure we'll get onto, as a barefoot runner, you're hyper vigilant when you wear shoes. So imagine when you're barefooted, the vigilance sort of goes up tenfold for anything that might be of damage to your feet or filth to your feet.
And there have been some really good photos of your feet up and how dirty they get. But before we get to any of that, I think the best place to start, and I know you've covered it on previous podcasts before, check me doing some actual research as well. Can you take us back to where your love of running came from, and then maybe extend that, broaden that to how you really got into barefoot running to begin with?
Sure. So I think I've always, weirdly, I think there was something that we did on the Barefoot crew about what's your background of running, or there was some bit. And when I was at school down in Sussex, there's a photograph of me. I must have been bordering on 13. Where I'm in, the starting position, not in starting blocks, but in a starting position barefoot to do. It was either 200 or 400 meters. I always quite enjoyed 400 meters actually at school, to be fair. So, and I was barefoot then, but it was not a recollection I had.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of so I've always run and had sort of elements of fitness. I've always liked strength training, and I think I'd moved to the US when I was 25, 20, 22, somewhere around there, 21, 22, no. Post-university, it was about 25. I went and joined a cruise ship and then ended up meeting a girl that became my first wife. And we ultimately worked our way through to Canada, which is where I settled for about sort of 8 to 10 years, I think. And I got into rugby and then realised that life and my age at the time, which was probably just cusping over into my early 30s, maybe rugby wasn't the sport that was working. And I circled back around in order to keep physically fit and active to running. So it seems to be sort of, I think the interest has been sort of latter years, I suppose, but it's always, some element of fitness has always been of interest.
You mentioned on the other podcast I've just mentioned there, I can't remember the name of it, but you did mention that quite a significant influence on fitness generally, because you are a physically fit guy. You do a lot of weight stuff, a lot of daily takes on what you're doing just to keep a good core strength and physical strength generally. You did mention a little bit of weight loss as well. Yeah. So I listened to Smartless. Are you familiar with Smartless with Jason Bateman? Not one I'm familiar with.
So Jason Bateman, Will Arnett, and Jack from God, his name's going to elude me now. Anyhow, they're 3 actors. They have a podcast called Smartless, and they interview a variety of celebrities. The reason I bring this up, and it really has only occurred to me recently, is that Jason Bateman is particularly, as an actor, he's sort of a Teen Wolf 2. He's done a whole bunch of Game Night, those sorts of films.
Yeah.
Not familiar with who he is. I find his dry sense of humour particularly funny, which is what was the draw to listening to it. But he refers to himself and why he is quite conscientious of what he eats, because inside of him there is a 400-pound man waiting to come out.
Yes.
If I rest and relax and put my feet up, my inclination is towards making poor choices from a dietary perspective. And so I've just had a couple of moments where I've gotten to, I think, 17 stone, which some have said, oh, it doesn't, you hold it well enough, but you're aware of your size. And so, yes, I've sort of fallen into, I'm glad to say the last 3 years I've been able to plateau, and I've sort of found what works for me. That could again be like a lot of things seeming to be illustrative of my life at the moment. It's sort of the acceptance of age and what works and what doesn't. And so I'm quite systematic in what I eat.
And having a routine as well, I find helps a lot. I did put up a post fairly recently about, I was similar to yourself. If I sit at a weekend, I am quite prone to getting a family sharing bag of crisps or two and eating them myself.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and I think nothing of that.
Yeah.
And then still feeling hungry. And it's so easy to do. It's how you maintain that lifestyle, though, of, well, I can do that, but I need to try and fight that fight somehow.
It's really interesting. So I've been working with a trainer off and on called Chris Prattley. He's got a feed called Moevo Chris. I tag him on a bunch of stuff. And we were sort of talking, I personally want to get down. So whilst I've plateaued, my weight has sort of bimbled along because I haven't been sort of conscientious of it. And there's a part of me that still wants to get down to just about sort of 13 and a half stone, which is about 190 pounds for anyone who listens abroad. And that would be my fighting weight. Some might argue, I think I got down to about 186 when I finished the world record. Just because of the nature of what it was doing and the sort of the consistency of running a half marathon every day. And everything sort of started not falling off. It wasn't sort of like watching Alone, if anyone watches Alone, where they sort of not starve themselves, but they're surviving for as long as they can. It wasn't that bad, but it was. There's quite a threshold, and I want to be at sort of just on that sweet spot, and that's what I'm hunting for. But I whilst it's going down, I'm building muscle as well. So it sort of becomes this sort of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. So I'm going down, but then the muscle's going up, and then it's all.
Yeah, I was going to say, because you do post a bit about your weight training side of your lifestyle as well, and it's really inspirational. Even before the 24, I remember people like Giz and others making comment about you were doing like pull-ups, weighted pull-ups, and you were doing like planks and all sorts of different things, and the comments of it would be great if we could do that. And it's not that anyone can, it's just they don't have the mindset to do it. And you seem to have that focus to get out and do that in whatever space you're doing it.
Yeah, I think the nature of my job, fundamentally self-employed, allows me to do it. And so I can devote some time to that. So it's become quite a part of my routine. Like it doesn't dictate, but it's I enjoy doing it. I enjoy the sensation of going out for a run with that, and that's interesting me. It sort of it ad-libs a little bit into sort of where I found myself today, in that I quite like just going out for a run, and when you get back, I don't have any airs to achieve anything. Not that I wouldn't want to achieve, but I don't. I enjoy the process of going out for a run, and whether that's an hour or whether that's half an hour or what have. So today, for a variety of reasons, I only ran for half an hour, but I got home feeling, sweaty, like I've sort of worked my body a bit, and that's all good. And then to do the strength training as well, it's very much sort of knowing what your levels of endurance are.
Yeah.
And I'm freaking convinced as well, by the way, that I left so much on the table up at Loch Ness last year. I'm honestly, when I do come back, because I will, because it feels like something I've left behind. This year, I think, is going to be, as much as I want to, I think it's just going to be problematic.
Mm-hmm.
When I do come, I want to do a solo and just see how far I can go until I drop.
We'll cycle back round to that, because I think there are reasons as well. And you've kind of touched on it when we're talking about running in London and being hyper aware of foot care. And I think that's maybe one of the reasons there would be an issue just beforehand. But it's kind of going back round to your love of running. You've always been fit from a young age. You've always had an interest in rugby, and then running, taking over that to have a more of a maintaining a lifestyle. Where did then barefoot running specifically kind of take off for you as a main interest?
Lockdown. Lockdown's got a lot to answer for. So barefoot running in the term where it is minimalist trainers.
Yeah.
Your Vibram Five Fingers and the various other brands that are out there. I found those in Canada. So I'd done, God, what was it? I'd started doing 10Ks with my ex-sister-in-law. And I'd done, it was called the Angus Glen Half Marathon, and I'd gotten into running at that point. This is sort of just outside of Toronto. And I'd done a few of those, and as you can hear on other podcasts, I happened to be looking for a change in trainer because I'd hit the sort of mileage, and I was in the market, and my eye glanced upon New Balance. I think they were called Nimbus 10, which was their entry into the barefoot marketplace. This was mid 2000, somewhere 2005, 6, 7, 8, somewhere around there. So quite a while back. Although, having said that, barefoot itself is just sort of
it's still really finding its feet. It's part of the pun.
Yeah, I'm not start. I didn't start anything or join the trend before. I think it was sort of probably on the periphery. Anyhow, I tried these shoes, and it was quite an easy and natural transition into them. I mean, you were guided by the shop assistant in that don't run before you walk in the shoes, and sort of gain confidence in sort of not having any cushioning. But it seemingly came to me quite naturally, as I recall, and in the scheme of things, it wasn't that long ago. And I haven't really put them down since. I was a bit resistant to the Vibram Five Fingers because it seemed a bit silly. Why do you? But I've since educated myself, obviously, over time. And I've had a dozen different pairs of the Vibram Five Fingered range, which have been super. But that's where it started. As for actually kicking off the shoes in their entirety, and it ad-libs into the creation of the Barefoot crew, I'm always remiss to sort of take the mantle for that, but apparently it started with something that I did. So I had seen, because of the Instagram tag and the nature of what my feed was, whether the algorithm started, my understanding is the algorithm started feeding me a whole bunch of content of people that were either running in sandals or were actually barefoot. And there was this chap down in Taunton that I'd started interacting with and chatting with, and we'd met a couple of times and sort of had conversations with. He was posting, and still does to this day, walks around barefooted, and he was working in a shoe shop but was barefooted. And I started seeing more of that sort of content. Didn't really matter where it was and how insignificant it was. My feed was there. I sort of resisted to the sandal. The Wild Soul guys, if they ever listen to this, will probably be sort of, oh, what the hell? I've spoken to Tom at length on a Zoom chat, and he knows where sort of my background is. But I don't know. It was like, well, I just don't see that either you wear shoes or you don't. It was kind of the attitude that I had. Yeah. Where it sort of materialized, and I think it just hit critical mass. I was quite enjoying the running at the time. And decided, and I was chatting to some people about it, and it was like, all right, fine, I will do this video, I will do this thing on this one day of the week and see how many people. And it snowballed a lot quicker than there was absolutely no virality to it in terms of sort of it became an internet sensation. It didn't, but those
got a good following.
Vic Owens, who is equally as reluctant to sort of take the limelight. She knows social media backwards and sideways, and I've gotten quite busy at work and sort of reached out to her and asked her to sort of pick up some of the mantle, and she's done so and turned it into this 6.5. I mean, we'll be hitting 10K, 10,000 followers before she's sort of done with it.
Easy. I do like that account as well because it's varied. There's a nice variety of information on it. It spotlights different people. You feature on it, but it's not just all about you guys. It's about the crew as a whole and the different walks of life that they come from, the different areas of the world that they come from. From a barefoot kind of kicking off the shoes perspective, do you feel then that when you're out running, from my perspective, there's something quite homely and nice when you get in from a hard day, just kicking the shoes off and being barefoot around the house? Is that what it feels like?
It does, and again, we'll probably circle back around to it. But there were a couple of moments on Loch Ness where sort of coming around that final point in the spanking rain, when you were sort of home stretch where all the tents were in our own tent city, actually taking the shoe, going through the woods was, for me, the simple answer to your question is yes, it's very much like that. There's some trepidation initially. What am I going to get up to? But it's quite exciting. It's almost like you get a little adrenaline rush. Even if to sort of you kick off the shoes on a winter's morning, you know it's cold. You can see frost on the ground, and you walk out and put your feet on the ground, like your bare feet on the ground. There's that sort of tingle, and you can describe it as whatever you want. Those who are slightly more into the bigger picture than I am might sort of say, well, that's your neurons and pulsars and all that sort of thing you're sucking up from the Earth's core. Mm-hmm. I can't answer that. I understand the science behind it, but it's just one of those. It's a freeing experience.
It's more comfort than anything else.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, there's also that sort of fun part of when you bump into people and they. God, you're barefoot, which amuses me generally because it sort of spurs a conversation in most cases. I mean, some people have had abuse before, which is quite shocking. I mean, curiosity it turns up in various faces, I suppose. It's most in the terms of abuse, but any interaction I've had, people have been curious and what's it like, and your feet must be like leather, and all that sort of thing. But that doesn't really. The leatheriness occurs if you're doing something consistently, but your feet are adaptable, like every part of your being, right? You will adapt to circumstances physically or mentally, and your feet are no different, right? Exactly.
Tell me then, how did you adapt to the challenge of the world record and even just running the marathon? How did your feet fare from that? Because that's a fair old distance for just the marathon alone in the kind of barefoot perspective. And I'm assuming it was barefoot shoes. It wasn't completely barefoot. But yes.
No. My first ever marathon was completely barefoot.
Was completely barefoot. So how did that? Was that on tar? Was that a trail marathon?
Yeah. So it's around for the 2012 Olympics, the Dorney Lake rowing centre. So there is a 4 mile, whatever it was. I can't remember how the loop length is, but you had to do sort of 4.5 loops around this lake. And we were completely barefoot. So the 4 founders of the barefoot crew took it. One of the guys was going to do it anyway. Sadly, he got injured and had to step out of the half marathon point. But with the other 3 of us decided to join him and come and run it, and that was the first marathon that I did. It was quite slow though, 5.5 hours.
Yeah, well, that's not slow. It's still pretty quick, especially if you're barefoot. You don't have slipper shoes on.
It was all tarmac. There was grass there and tarmac. So if things got a little out of hand, it was quite. And again, this falls into the. It's not that I've left anything on the table. I'd be quite keen to go back and do it and see if I could do it faster. Yeah,
now you've got the knowledge and the experience.
Yeah, and the takeaway was that I ended up. I sort of placed my feet in a way that I ended up having quite a big blister on the underside of my foot, but it didn't really sort of manifest beyond popping it and off to the race. It was fine. You just sort of compede it and you're fine.
Other than the blister, your feet were pretty good. They adapted to the terrain and to your pace.
Yeah. I've had no particular complaints. I have not so much at the moment because my barefooting adventures have been overshadowed by trying to get back in play with running generally. But I have cracks up the back of my heel that my mother, and to a certain degree, my wife is quite accepting of the madness of it. My mother, every time she sees my feet, is like, "My God, that must be horrendous for you." You don't really notice. I think there's just a sort of a firmness to the foot, but I get barefooters' feet are as sensitive as anyone else's, just maybe slightly more conditioned. To the various terrain changes that you can encounter.
Terrain changes it kind of leads me back to London, but then also to coming up to the 24. You had not long before the 24 been out running and you'd cut your foot, and you'd been out on, I think it was grass. You'd been out on a field,
Yeah.
You quite badly cut your foot, and that was only a couple of weeks or a week before the 24. So you come up with an injury. And I think you did yourself an injustice, and you kind of touched on it there. You feel like you've left a little bit on the table, but you did have an injury slightly different to what the rest of us might have had, like calf injuries or knee. To have a cut on the bottom of your foot where it's constantly moving and flexing and doesn't really get a chance to heal as well as anywhere else on the body. I feel like you might have been unfair on yourself. You still managed to do an incredible distance. You were very hard on yourself every lap that you did, given the terrain and the weather as well. And you did try your best in shoes, and you eventually said, "No, stuff it. I'm going out." And I think you'd had your slides on or something, and you took them off. You tried to do some distance, and you were happier when you came back.
It was the first pair of Wild Soul sandals that I'd been sort of practicing with. And actually, they're great. I mean, I was a resistant convert to the whole sandal. I would not wear them with socks, if I'm brutally honest.
What sort of Englishman are you?
Who the fuck wears socks with a sandal? And I ain't no Jesus follower, man. Sorry, I retract that last statement. But I tried it in those, but there were moments where I felt sort of comfortable with the terrain that I was able to sort of kick them off, and actually, you just open up more. You just feel sort of more in touch with where you're running. In terms of sort of injury, like I sort of deviated my own way past the sort of world record thing. I mean, the world record thing was within the first 3 days of doing that, I got a cut on my left toe at the sort of one of the creases that I assumed would just sort of sort itself out, and by I think it was day 23 or 24, there was some concern that it was potentially going to go septic.
Yeah, septic. Yeah, just because it's not in a place that breathes. It's flexing all the time.
It was exposed to the terrain. So the course that I'd chosen was it's called the North Wessex area of natural beauty. It's beautiful. I mean, it's not Highlands beautiful, but it has its own majesty to it. And I mean, it made going and doing it every day an absolute joy. But on the set, if you were to do drone imagery of it, you'd be like, "Oh my God, that's like smooth as a baby's bottom," and it's fine. But a lot of the fields are arable farms or arable fields, and so there's hooved animals in there, and so the grasses generally can be quite resilient. So you obviously have some soft grass, and you have some slightly more I'll term it as pampas grass, but they sort of stick up. And this injury every so often would get stuck with like sort of fairly
the stubble. Yeah,
stubble. Thank you. That's a good term.
Used to work on a farm. So.
Oh well, there you go. So every so often you'd find your groove, and then you'd land on just this random bit of grass that would sort of just send ripples of electricity through your being. So it was fine, but I guess you sort of work out a solution to get through that, and you just persevere. And hey, it was only 2.5 hours, right, at the max.
What was the record then?
So the record was the most consecutive barefoot half marathons, and the men's version was set at 20 days.
And how many days did you manage?
31.
Wow.
We did, but this is Vic's fault. I mean, I would have been quite happy to stop at 25, and she's like, no. If we're doing this, we're going to 31. And actually, doing 31 kind of cock blocks it for anyone else, because it's a consecutive month. It has to be within a month.
Yeah.
And the fact that we've gone to the only way you would beat it, would be by doing it 30 days but at a quicker pace. Or I don't know how you would sort of beat 20. If you set the marker at 20, then there's still 10 or 11 days in which you can still catch up. The fact that we did it at 30, anyhow.
It probably would have to come down to, as you say, time. If you were a much faster runner in the barefoot world, and you were doing it in some silly time, let's say an hour 30, like you mentioned to me off the recording, maybe then. But that's quite a record to have if no one can beat it.
Yeah, not that no one can beat. They can.
It's hard to beat. Yeah.
Yeah. It was quite fun. Like it was quite nice to do something to achieve. Like I wouldn't have even thought about it, if I'm brutally honest, Vic's got a lot to answer for, really, because she was looking to do the female version, and I'd sort of mentioned after the marathon I'd felt that the blood was in the water, and my eyes had dilated, and okay, let's see where we can take this barefoot thing. And so
what was the female record then before as well?
There wasn't one.
There wasn't one. So whatever she did was going to be the benchmark, and to set the benchmark at something that's incredibly hard to beat.
But then she's a bloody force of nature, that woman. I mean, Christ, she is. Her drive is just beyond me in terms of what she accomplishes. I mean, I think I'm moving to a phase of life where, and don't misconstrue this, I don't give a shit kind of mentality. And it's not that I don't give I'm always in awe of anyone who achieves and pushes themselves beyond what they would typically think is possible. She just seems to do it as part of her job. Like, that's what it feels like, not because, but her passion is driven. It's quite a thing to behold, and the fact that, and she can come up against walls, and for the most part, she seems to find that extra thing that drives her forward. I think she's had a bit of coaching of late, because she had a couple of failures last year.
Okay,
but she's quite and so it's her freaking idea.
So where your partners in crime, it may be driven by the whole grandness of achievement and pushing boundaries. Like you say, it's not that you don't give a shit. It's more you do things because you want to do them.
I want to try.
Be happy about it.
Yeah, very much. I mean, I think it was, can I do it? And that was sort of, and I think there's a lot of people that might sort of buy into that. I think I think some people, can I do this thing? You've got to ask yourself the question. And if you don't, so be it.
Yeah.
But at least you try.
Yeah, well, you don't know unless you try. And that maybe actually segues quite nicely into a question I've got about, if anyone's listening that maybe wants to give barefoot running a go, what would you say is the best starting point? Is it just a case of give it a try, kick your shoes off and go for it? Or would you more recommend a softly try the barefoot shoe and then?
I mean, so I think that there's a guy called the Barefoot athlete Sean Haber, based down in Israel. He did a sheet. He did a sheet of sort of what that transitionary process is like, or what would be an appropriate way to sort of transition from your regular, dare I say it, bog standard shoes into sort of slightly more of a barefoot preference.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good resource, and you can find it through the Barefoot Crew and all that. So it's not a plug or anything. If people will want to find out, there was a community there that was sort of essentially created for these sorts of questions.
Yeah.
My personal view, I had run in barefoot shoes for quite a time. So you consider the 2008 approximately when I got my first barefoot shoes, to eventually coming here or returning home in 2013. So what's that? That's 5 years. I didn't kick the shoes off until lockdown. What's that? That's 2022?
2019, 2020.
Yeah, 2019. So that's quite a change. But then I don't think it was really hitting it wasn't hitting my core points of interest.
Mm-hmm.
At that time. So I think you can take time. What I don't know who said, know thyself, right? This is the core to it, and I think I've said it on other things before. You know yourself. Don't, just because I'm going to tell you how to do it, if you have an interest in taking off your shoes, take them off. Go and stand in the garden. And then if you're comfortable standing on grass or in the garden or on your patio or on your deck or whatever it is, but maybe, and you're still curious and you're like, well, what would it feel like to do this? Then do that. But in terms of running, I wouldn't going barefoot. I wouldn't go off and do a 5 or 10K right out the gate. Take your time, walk and run. I mean, I'm a classic run walker, right? I will run, I will go for a distance, and then I sort of tend to temper down and sort of catch my breath and sort of get a sense of where I am at, or check my watch. And then you carry on going. That worked for me, and I'd imagine worked for any sort of barefooter. But it's all about taking your time. There's no set rule. There is a book. I've read a few books. So there's a guy called Ken Bob Saxton. He's largely referred to as the godfather of barefoot running. He has a book called, it's gonna slip my mind now. You kind of want to call it the Barefoot Bible, but he essentially even has diagrams of how the method by which you should run if you want to become a barefoot runner. He wasn't a massively prolific author, I think, so you could if anyone was interested enough, you can search Ken Bob Saxton, and it's in there. He's referenced in Born to Run, which is largely considered the sort of go-to book, and actually Born to Run 2. This is by Chris McDougall, and who wrote the original, and it was Chris McDougall and his trainer that wrote the sequel. And actually, I have a copy of it. So Born to Run 2, and it is actually a sort of a step-by-step guide on how you sort of go about sort of barefoot running and lifestyle choices and all that sort of thing. And it's very much on the PC way life is moving, as society is moving to, and all that sort of stuff. So there are a ton of resources, and more now than I think there have ever been, especially with the prolific rise in sort of Vivo Barefoot and Zero Shoes and Field Grounds, and it seems every 5 minutes you turn around and there's a different barefoot shoe coming out because people have sort of cottoned onto it. There's a whole bunch of, you could look at Rita, I'm going to cock up a name now, a guy called Andy Bryant in Australia who is a barefoot podiatrist, and there's also the Healthy Feet Alliance. So in answer to the question, it's a very long way of sort of saying, if you want to get out there and try it, there is a shit ton of stuff that you can fall, like rabbit holes you can fall down.
Really just to do a little bit of personal research to, is it is it good for you? It is good for you. I mean, but good, is it good for this specific person? And in a way, it is maybe softly take your shoes off in the park, go for it. And I even as kids, I think most people will remember taking their shoes off and running around in the grass and the feeling of how responsive it could be. But at the time, you don't think of that side of it. You're just thinking it's a bit of fun running around with your shoes on. Yeah. You mentioned there as well as it's maybe something that I didn't really give any consideration of. As much as there are nuances into the style and the best form of running, of midsole rolling and giving yourself propulsion, there's certainly going to be even more nuances to barefoot running to give yourself the longevity of not ruining your feet, not stubbing your toes, not ruining your main items that get you from A to B.
Yeah. The Ken Bob Saxton, who gets into a little bit more, as I said, technicality, is that you're lightly kissing the ground as you're running. So your foot, obviously you're touching the ground, but it is a big, this is the debate, right? It's the forefoot strike, mm-hmm. and the heel barely sort of lifts off, and that's sort of the process. But there's enough stuff out there that talks about sort of falling forward, and that's what sort of, so running on the spot and then sort of falling forward. It's like that as a process. I'm not a running coach. I've read what I've read and try to sort of mimic it as best as I can. But you don't pronate or what is it? Pronate or what's the other?
I have no clue, Ben. I do what works for me. Don't know the words for it.
The theory is that barefooting leads to a situation where gait analysis becomes unnecessary because your foot is naturally designed to roll. Okay. Like you've got 25 to 30% of your entire muscle and bone buildup is in your feet.
Yeah.
It's a significant number in considering the size of that people grow out to. And so your foot is designed to move and undulate as much as your hands do when you're sort of gesticulating in a conversation such as we're doing now. And to sort of encase them into you can get into the neurons and how much my body is taking in I'm not a physicist, but how the world is, the molecular interest that your feet, all that sort of stuff. You can get into that, but naturally speaking, your feet are designed to be able to adjust and move, and that's where it's really sad, Stephen. I've not looked at shoes since I fell down this rabbit hole in the same way. You walk around London and you see people with these massive bubble. I'm like, what the fuck? Yeah. Why would you do that?
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter which came before that. It's just what my opinion is. I'm not going to judge anyone. I'm by definition I'm judging, but it's just how we. Just because we could create it
doesn't mean we should.
Doesn't mean that we should have done.
Yeah, I think I know what you mean, because I'm very fond of a good leather work shoe with a thin sole, so you do feel the terrain under you. You can feel a sharp stone. I'm a bit of a poser. I do like a nice pair of leather shoes, but they almost like the thinner the sole, the better. But it seems to be very polar opposite to the way I like my running shoes now. It's the carbon plated
Vaporflies and all. Do you know the funny thing is you can hear obviously there are a lot of people when we did the marathon around Dorney Lake. It's quite flat and boring track, and you could hear the Vaporfly because it's like that. All the stuff, and there we are sort of. I mean, we could have crept up on people had the feet and there not being any sort of foliage for us to hide upon.
And that's something I've been told off for in the past. When you've got a thin sole on and you've got a more kind of barefoot almost style of shoe, even though they're leather work shoes, you can go silently, and people just from the gentleness of it. And then, like you say, I was out running with the Vapors on the other night. there was a little bit of moisture, and it was the slap, but the suction as well. It just sounded like a very odd thing. If anyone was ahead of me, they were thinking, what the hell's coming behind me? Right. So then, looking at maybe what's coming next, you feel like you've maybe got some goals to tackle with something like the 24 again, whether that is the Loch Ness one or whether that's any of the number of other 24s that are available.
I am hands down coming back to Loch Ness. It just, and I was fully committed to wanting to do it this year, but there's just been elements that are out of my control that sort of leads me to the opposite. So my hope and expectation is that much of the crowd will be returning next year.
Yeah, this year's a bit of an odd one where there's weddings on, there's other things on that are kind of stopping people from coming back. Whereas next year, maybe with enough planning, we can make more of a big team thing of it again, and fingers crossed and praying that it isn't.
I would come had Giz not come in and saved the day by providing me with a tent. I could have been in all manner of trouble, and so I would come a hell of a lot more prepared.
You did come by far the longest distance out of everyone.
Yeah. The distance is neither here nor there. I'm not entirely certain what the hell I was thinking in terms of planning for accommodations and weather. I don't think I just naturally assumed the weather would have been glorious because that's what it had said 3 weeks prior,
and it had been the year previous as well. And it was sun splitting the ground, worthy of heat.
But in answer to what's next, for anyone who has graciously followed my Instagram feed, the beginning of the year I was getting an awful lot of heel issues, and it was just pissing me off. I couldn't go out for a run without sort of waking up the following morning and my legs sort of screaming at me. And you could put it down to the environmental, the weather and meteorological problems, and the weather's been a bit shit and it's always raining and it's always cold, whatever. I just think that I don't know what it is. And it was around that time that I then engaged this guy, Chris Prattley, on whatever Chris is called. He's very much a sort of a strength and conditioning coach, and I think some of the stuff we're doing has started paying off dividends. That I would say literally 6 months of post Loch Ness. 6 months have just felt a bit crap for running and just not being engaged in it. That seems to have taken a turn, but it's been more of a I'm going to go out with my dog and go for a run and enjoy that time and not think about. I was getting caught up. I was going to attempt, and never say never, I was going to attempt another world record in the last May holiday that was gone, of attempting to run 140 miles in 24 hours. I was absolutely hell-bent on that, for it to only be sort of pushed off to the wayside because the heel issues were sort of kicking in. But I was getting obsessed about how could I improve my breathing efficiency in order to sort of maintain a 7-minute mile pace for 24 hours straight, to be able to nail 104. I mean, it's not a small task.
No.
And I think there was a number of factors that I was getting caught up with. You can do opening up my nasal passages so that I'm breathing through my nose better to make my breathing more efficient. All that sort of stuff was just sort of churning through. And I think maybe I lost the enjoyment out of running. And so I sort of pulled out. Obviously, Lee and some of you, I think, had I pulled it off, may have even sort of crossed the border and come down to support. But yeah. I'm glad to say I sort of pulled it fairly early, because I could have. Yeah, I just don't think I was prepared enough for it. Fast forward to today, and I'm just quite enjoying going out. If I'm doing a 12-minute pace, mate, I'm great. That's fine. But I know that I've checked my watch, as I'm sure we all do at points when we're running, seeing what the pace is you're maintaining. And it's not terribly uncomfortable to maintain a 7-minute or an 8-minute pace.
Yeah.
I'm perfectly happy with those. So in answer to your question, what's next? I don't know. But I've said to a couple of people who have done these backyard ultra things, so the 24, much like Loch Ness.
Yeah.
They do, because of that freedom to do as many laps as you feel comfortable with. I quite like the freedom in that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm going to go out. Well, I feel all right. I'm going to go and do a second lap. Oh, I feel all right. I'm going to go and do a third. And it just feels a little bit more of an easy point of entry in terms of races.
It certainly sounds like it's more finding your love for running again, and then just seeing what happens, and whether that's the world record attempt again raising its head. At least you'll be comfortable and you'll have the love for it again without it being like another job or having your life taken over by over-analyzing every movement that you make.
Yeah. Zone 2 training people talk about. I think the whole point of zone I've thought about this a couple of times recently because I've got my heart, like zone 2, my heart rate needs to be, I think it's sort of it's your maximum heart rate minus your age. And so I think I need to be 140-ish, somewhere around there. And I've taken that, but I think zone 2 is about not worrying about that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And you will run at a pace that your body is comfortable with. And fun, I check Strava each time it sort of uploads, or Garmin, or whichever it is, and it's coming in at about the right sort of heart rate for that sort of start. It's only because I've elevated, because I've seen a section that I quite like, and so running downhill. I just think running is about just going out there and enjoying, and you can get all hippie-ish with it and convening with nature. It's just going outside and doing some exercise. That's all that bangs. My job is fundamentally spent with gym people who are trying to find them space.
Yeah.
And the long and the short of it is that people just go out and do some exercise.
It's free.
Yeah, man.
I mean, that's maybe a good place to end it. Actually, Ben, is it's very like you say, it's very hippie-ish in a way, but it's not. It is the trend, and as the kids are saying, go out and touch grass. I don't even know if they're saying that anymore. I'm not down with the kids. If anyone wants to follow you, or even the Barefoot crew, what are the handles that they can do that with?
So I am at the Barefoot Daddy. I flip, and Barefoot Daddy is my main account. That's where I spend most of my time. The Barefoot Crew is the Barefoot Crew at Barefoot Crew 5K. You can find that group there. You can find that group. Yeah, you can find those accounts there. So my wife.
It's a good time then. You also have, just before we finish off, you also have a website with a bit of a blog. I don't know if you're updating that much at all just now.
I haven't done it late, but it's the barefootdaddy.com. There's a link in my Lime Tree. There's some links in there if people want to follow on Strava. There was a time where there was a desire to sort of garner a following and see what it would manifest into. If people want to follow, they can follow. If they've got any questions, I'll answer them. I quite enjoy sort of interacting. We wouldn't be having this conversation had there not be some interaction through Instagram. And I've found it invaluable for making what I expect to be lifelong friends, whether it's running at the core or not.
It's been fantastic. I've thoroughly enjoyed our time tonight, Ben, and I can only thank you so much for coming on and speaking to me.
Yeah, absolutely welcome, Stephen. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
And to you.
So chill, so relaxed, and so very zen. I bloody love Ben. I didn't get as much face-to-face time with him as I might have liked when we did the Loch Ness 24 last year, predominantly because of the weather, but also because he was typically out on the course after me, making it pretty much impossible. But the time that I did get, well, it was of course a pleasure. He certainly resonates the vibes that he kind of jokingly poked fun at with peace, love and happiness. It's hard to believe that he is also a super heavy metal fan, much like myself in his spare time and when he is smashing out some awesome workouts and mega runs. Check out what Ben and the Barefoot crew have on the go on his and their Instagram pages, if nothing more than to open up your mind a little bit to the different avenues going on out there in the wider running world. Thanks so much for joining me today, though. Downloading and streaming the podcast will always be the best ways that you can support the show. If you'd like to show your physical support for the podcast at all, you can purchase a t-shirt from our merchandise partners over at Twisted Running. Pop over to the Twisted Running website or find a link on our website, thepoint99podcast.com. The show is available on all major podcast platforms, as well as on our website via the inbuilt player on the episodes page. You can also find us on YouTube, both YouTube podcasts and YouTube itself, with some nice little graphics that the system generates for us. Finally, you can follow us on Instagram by searching the Point99 podcast. If you want to get in touch, drop us a DM there or on my own Instagram, Mr_Steve_runs, or you can do the old fashioned thing and email me at thepoint99podcast@gmail.com. As always, I can't thank you enough for tuning in today, though. I will admit we have some cracking guests coming up in episodes 9 and 10. Admittedly, they are ultra runners, but we won't hold that against them. But until the next episode, until episode 9, I hope you stay safe. Enjoy your runs, and you will hear from me soon.